Hello and welcome back to the Literary Lair. It's certainly been a while, and if you haven't seen my little explainer video where I discuss my decision to forego the 200th anniversary festivities because of both the current state of the world, making it difficult, but also because I've sort of lost my spark for it, that's why I'm wearing a different coat and bow tie in the intro. Because I wanted to have my cake and eat it too, I'm wearing my alternate Christmas bow tie instead of the new one that I chose for the post-200th episode stuff. But enough about that. Check out the video for more information. Let's talk about Doctor Who. I feel like if I'm going to skip over the 200th episode and make a triumphant return, I should make it at least slightly tie into tradition, and since it was the third Doctor who helped kick off this show nearly 9 years ago, it feels fitting to use another story featuring him to kick off my return, but instead of a novelization, I'm instead going back to the well that is the 12 Doctors of Christmas, the anthology of Doctor Who Christmas stories with entries featuring all 12 Doctors that existed at the time of publication, save for the War Doctor, since the Time War isn't very festive, despite Doctor Who trying to make it festive. Today's story will be the Christmas Inversion, and if that calls up images of a newly regenerated 10th Doctor, blood control, and the Sycorax, that's because while the 3rd Doctor is the main character, it doesn't take place in the temporally unclear unit time period, but that's getting ahead of ourselves. The story features Joe Grant, Captain Mike Yates, and the Doctor mentions the business with Omega, so this is sometime after the 3 Doctors, but not too long after, since Joe is still around. Fitting, since that's the last Pertwee-era story I looked at on the show. The only other thing of note we need to talk about is that the author of the story, Jacqueline Rayner, is one of those really prolific Doctor Who writers who have been writing in the universe for years, and has worked on both classic Who books and short stories, new Who books and short stories, and spin-offs like Bernice Summerfield, Diary of River Song, and Donna Noble Kidnapped. She's right up there with writers like Paul Cornell and Gary Russell. Also, she wrote Doctor Who and the Pirates, the only, and to my knowledge, Big Finish audio drama that's also a musical, but I'd be really glad to be proven wrong if anyone knows of others. Anyway, I've been away for a while, so I don't want to stall any more than I already have, so let's join the 3rd Doctor as he peeks ahead at a later chapter in his life. This is the Christmas Inversion. So we already talked about the cover the first time I did a story from this, so we'll just talk about the illustration instead. It's really darn good. The artwork for each story ranges in style from very stylized to semi-realistic, and this, I think, is a perfect happy medium. It's cartoony, but not too much so, depicting a scene from later on as the Doctor is attacked by evil mistletoe. Hey, it happens. Surrounding the Doctor are Joe Grant, Jackie Tyler, and Mike Yates, and I have to say the likenesses here are superb, and they really look like the actors they're depicting. The only one who isn't completely identical to their real-life counterpart is Yates, but everyone else is perfect, and the background is cute and festive, as it should be. Anyway, let's get to the story itself. Our story opens in Unit HQ as the TARDIS receives a future transmission from an unfamiliar older woman, requesting help from the Doctor. Despite the temporally confused circumstances, the Doctor is ready to answer the call, even if Joe is rightfully concerned that the entire situation may have been engineered by the Master, although the Doctor doubts it. Captain Mike Yates helps the Doctor carry a machine made from corks and sporks into the TARDIS to help isolate the message and allow the Doctor to home in on it, and despite trying to avoid a trip, Mike Yates is stuck in the TARDIS as it takes off for the future. Arriving in the future, the Doctor finds himself outside an apartment building and suddenly feels weak, since his future self, the newly regenerated 10th Doctor, is siphoning off some regenerative energy from his past, like an advance on a paycheck. This might also explain why the 10th Doctor could regenerate his hand in the hours following regeneration, since he'd taken some excess from an earlier self, and there aren't usually two Doctors present at regeneration. Anyway, he finds a woman angrily storming into his TARDIS, Jackie Tyler, who is completely shocked and then royally annoyed when she finds that the Doctor has gone and changed his face again, twice in as many hours, and doesn't stop talking long enough for Jo and Yates to explain that they are in a regenerated Rose and Mickey Smith, whoever they are, which is a fun little inversion of the Three Doctors, where the Brigadier was entirely nonplussed by the Doctor seemingly changing his face back to Patrick Troughton's, and was really just annoyed about the whole Omega situation. Through Jackie's ranting and raving, they managed to learn the name of the woman contacting the Doctor, who turns out to be
Harriet Jones, Prime Minister.
Yes, I know who she is. And as they try to explain to Jackie that they're from another time, Jackie suddenly gets it in her head that they're Slovene and runs up to her flat. The Doctor, Jo, and Yates follow her to explain, and they find some booby traps in the apartment set up to catch the Doctor, like the evil Christmas tree and those Santas that stalked Rose and Mickey in the episode, including parasitic mistletoe, and disarm it by feeding it brandy and plum pudding. After all, Christmas wouldn't be Christmas without it. Jo finally manages to explain to Jackie that they're not Rose and Mickey, and the Doctor explains that he's never known a Rose. Jackie is concerned that he forgot Rose so easily, but he naturally tells her that he just hasn't met her yet. He does know a Clara, though. Although Jackie manages to shake Jo a little by questioning why she's no longer traveling with the Doctor in the future, making her wonder what fate will befall her. After mistaking a broken ornament for another booby trap and not knowing what's going on with the 10th Doctor, the Doctor, Jo, Yates, and Jackie head for Unit HQ to provide their services to Harriet Jones, with there being a rather humorous joke about the fact that Unit HQ in the past had a giant sign proclaiming that it was Unit HQ instead of a clandestine HQ hidden in the Tower of London like modern Unit has. But what's the point of having a secret hideout if you can't advertise it? People are going to know about it anyway. They have to hire contractors and builders and plumbers to make it in the first place. Unfortunately, they aren't let in because their Unit documents are decades out of date and the guards don't recognize Unit's original United Nations Intelligence Task Force name, assuming Yates got it wrong when he proclaims his identity. And it doesn't help that after they poured the brandy on the creature, it spilled on Yates, so he smells like a drunk. Thankfully, this is about the time that the 10th Doctor found the great big threatening button which must never ever be pressed under any circumstances, and the Doctor is convinced that the situation is well in hand, heading back to the Powell estate to drop Jackie off. Arriving back, they hear a voice calling out for the Doctor, which belongs to the Master. Jo's suspicions have been proven correct. The Master did indeed travel to the future in an attempt to ally himself with the Sycorax, and say it with me now, take over the world.
Of course!
That's an oldie but a goodie. But instead of one of the booby traps triggered when he landed in the apartment due to his Time Lord physiology, and with that broken Christmas ornament playing an endless rendition of the 12 Days of Christmas, the Doctor decides that he's been punished enough and releases the Master, allowing him to flee in his TARDIS. Jackie asks the Doctor what'll happen to Rose in the future, if she'll be abandoned or left behind or whatever happened to Jo, but the Doctor tells her that he's never the one who leaves. Well, except for Susan, he left her, and technically it wasn't either his nor Jamie and Zoe's choice to leave the Second Doctor, and let's just call those outliers. This comforts Jackie as the Doctor and Yates head back into the TARDIS, and despite Jo wanting to remain behind to meet the new Doctor, who she admits is a dish, the Doctor gets Jo into the TARDIS before she alters the timeline. Besides, she'll get to meet his replacement later on. As they depart, Jo asks the Doctor about what he said about his not being the one to leave the companions, and the Doctor tells Jo that she'll fly the nest one day. But he'll never push her out. The best Christmas gift Jo could ever be given. which is a really sweet sentiment until you remember that according to the sacrifice of Joe Grant from The Legacy of Time, the Third Doctor watched a future version of Joe die in Dorset 2 years previously, and I'm not sure if this takes place before or after he figured out how to save her. Being a short story, it's got very good pacing, and the 20 pages go by fairly quickly, and it keeps itself exciting, mainly because it has the backdrop of the established inaugural Christmas special to keep you wondering if the Doctors will ever cross paths. Thankfully, they don't. I like the idea of the Doctor being in the background without his future self ever knowing, and likely without the younger Doctor ever knowing, Blinovich's limitation and all that. The part where the Doctor gives some regenerative energy to his future self also helps potentially explain one of the more laughable elements of the Christmas invasion, the idea that Time Lords can regrow lost limbs within the first day after regenerating, and I prefer to think that it was the Third Doctor's excess energy that allowed it, since while I can accept that hours after regeneration they might have enhanced strength like the Fourth Doctor, or be able to resist bullets temporarily like River Song, but Time Lords are not salamanders. Well, except for this one. Additionally, there are a lot of good time travel jokes. Jackie sends Yates into the bedroom to find a computer, and he can't find it, since in his time, computers are huge cabinets, and she was referring to a small laptop that Yates remarks looks like a sandwich toaster. It's stuff like that which unfortunately could never materialize during the classic era, since futurism is always based on what currently exists, and the writers never imagined such things, and instead improved on their existing technology. Another good bit is the part at Unit HQ, where they weren't let in because their IDs were expired. Although, given that they employed a time traveler, I figure that Unit would be a lot more willing to entertain the idea, especially if they have IDs dated with their faces on it. That's what happens when they don't have a Lethbridge steward at the helm. This never would have happened with the Brigadier or Kate in charge. The constant bits of Joe immediately pointing the finger at the Master despite the Doctor's objections is hilarious, given how for an entire season, while Joe was a companion, the bad guy was always the Master, despite him saying at the end of each episode that he never wants to set foot on Earth ever again. As is the fact that the Master was in fact involved, although not in the way Joe thought. And truthfully, given that this story takes place post-Frontier in space, it means that the Master is soon to become crispy and, frankly, a lot more insane than the Delgado incarnation was, and honestly, I'd buy that a broken Christmas ornament is what did it to him. Makes about as much sense as retconned-in drums that allegedly existed in his original incarnation. Yeah, not a big fan of that plot element either, if you can't tell. There's also a quip Jackie makes about never needing any washing up bowls, which I'm sure is a reference to the traditional roundels, but it just makes me think of that joke that SF Debris made when referring to the TARDIS's time monster interior.
Ironically, Joe, I can't find a salad bowl for the life of me.
I'm so happy they didn't make that interior permanent. It's so ugly. Despite being just 20 pages, the characterization is spot on, and even in such a short space, everyone is written expertly. The Doctor's dialogue has that Pertwee flair to it, with his penchant for using terms like madam.
Madam, what year is this?
And Jackie Tyler's dialogue is completely in character, especially her tirade to the unit guards at the tower, and I could absolutely hear all of the voices of the characters coming through the page, although in particular I could hear Pertwee and Camille Kaduri's voices above the others. None of that's particularly shocking, given Rayner's experience in the universe, and the descriptions of locations and items are well done as well. Despite it being a fair few years since I watched anything set at the Powell estate, I could see all the action happening. I also think that this is a far more dignified version of the idea that I think Russell T Davies was going for in School Reunion, where the Doctor's current companion realizes that they won't always be with the Doctor, but without all that bad comedy that episode featured. And that was The Christmas Inversion, a great light Christmas story that is particularly helpful in this crap sack of a year. Not only does it call back to a simpler time, both to the early days of the modern era, but also to fairly early days for the classic era as well, but it's also struck a balance between comedy and action that I don't think that the television show has ever really done well. I really enjoyed it, and it's made me want to check out even more of Rayner's work than I already have. She's done a few things with the first Doctor, and if it's anywhere near as good as her work with the third, I think I'll probably love it. And if you're a Doctor Who fan and have never listened to or read anything written by Rayner, rectify that immediately. To that end, I highly recommend this story to any and all Doctor Who fans who are looking to fill the void left by the lack of Christmas special this year. But we do have a New Year's special to look forward to that looks like it promises to be a fun time. Also, I really dig those new Dalek designs. My love will always be the classic era versions, but I'm always open to change. Heck, I like the Paradigm Daleks after all. And I hope you guys are too, because while bow ties are cool, purple bow ties are even cooler. Next time, well, after this year, I'm resolving not to plan that far in advance anymore, so we'll just have to wait and see. But I intend to be back, hopefully before the end of the year, but if not, I will try my damnedest to get a video out the first week of January. See you next time. Makes about as much sense as retconned in drums that allegedly existed in his original incarnation. Yeah, not a big fan of that plot.